I was in Japan for a business trip, just a quick weekend thing. The company I work for is notoriously cheap, so instead of booking us something nice, they stuck me in this old, rundown hotel. It wasn't even in a good part of the city, just some random spot near the outskirts where everything seemed a bit tired, if that makes sense. When I checked in on Friday, I noticed a few weird things right away. The lobby was small and dimly lit, with flickering fluorescent lights that hummed loudly. There was no one else around except for a single receptionist who barely looked up from their phone when I arrived. Now, if you've never been to Japan, there is something you should know about their hotels and buildings. They don't use the number 4 for floors. It's a cultural thing. The word for 4 sounds a lot like the word for death in Japanese, so they usually skip this entirely. So in this hotel, the floors went 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, and so on. I was staying on the 6th floor, which felt weirdly high up considering how small the building looked from the outside. But whatever. It was just a place to sleep. The weekend passed uneventfully. Mostly work meetings, lots of coffee, and trying to avoid getting lost. On the last night, Sunday, I stayed out a little later than usual, grabbing dinner with a colleague out at a nearby ramen shop. By the time I got back to the hotel, it was close to midnight. The lobby was completely empty. Even the receptionist was gone. The whole place felt eerily quiet, like I was the only person in the entire building. I headed straight for the elevator, pressing the worn-out button and waiting as the faint hum of the machinery echoed through the lobby. The elevator arrived with a ding, and I stepped inside. It smelled musty, like old carpet that had been left damp for too long. The panel inside was scratched up, and the buttons flickered weakly when pressed. I hit the button for the 6th floor and the door slid shut with a creak. That's when the first weird thing happened. The lights in the elevator flickered as it started moving. Not just a little flicker, but a full-on strobe effect for a few seconds before everything stabilized. I laughed it off, thinking, cheap hotel, cheap maintenance. But then, right as we passed the 3rd floor, the elevator jolted. Hard. Like it hit something midair. The lights went out completely. I stood there in the pitch black, my heart pounding in my chest. The elevator wasn't moving anymore. It was completely still, stuck somewhere between the 3rd and 5th floors. I fumbled for my phone, turning on the flashlight. The small beam of light didn't do much. It just made the cramped space feel smaller. I pressed the emergency button on the panel, but nothing happened. No sound, no response, no nothing. I tried calling the front desk, but of course there was no signal. That's when I noticed something strange. A faint light was shining through the crack of the elevator doors. It wasn't coming from the hallway. There's no way light could seep in from there. It was just there. This weird dim glow that didn't make any sense. I stood there frozen, staring at it when suddenly, bang! Something hit the side of the elevator. Then another bang, and another. It was coming from all around me, above, below, the walls. It felt like something or someone was slamming into the elevator from every direction. I don't know how long it went on, but it felt like forever. The noise was deafening, this relentless pounding that made the walls shake. I wanted to scream, but my throat felt like it was closing up. I backed into the corner of the elevator, clutching my phone like it was some kind of weapon. My flashlight started to flicker and I felt like I was about to lose it completely. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Silence. The light coming through the elevator doors faded and for a moment, everything was still. I took a shaky breath, trying to steady myself, when the elevator suddenly lurched. The lights flickered on, and the machinery groaned as it started moving again. The doors opened to the 6th floor like nothing had happened. I stumbled out, my legs shaking, and made my way to my room. I don't remember much of what happened after that. I think I just locked the door and sat on the bed, staring at the wall for hours. The next morning I checked out as fast as I could, barely saying a word to the receptionist who had magically reappeared. Here's the thing that really gets to me though. When I got back home, I couldn't stop thinking about that night. I did some digging, trying to find out more about the hotel. Turns out it has a bit of a history. A few years ago, there was a fire that destroyed part of the building. Several people died, including a woman and her 2 kids who were trapped in the upper floors. There were also rumors about shady business practices, like the owners cutting corners on safety measures to save money. I don't know if any of that had anything to do with what happened to me, but it makes me wonder. All I know is I'm never staying in a cheap hotel ever again. I can't believe I'm writing this. I don't know if anyone will even care, but I need to get it out. Maybe it will help me process what happened. I've been replaying it in my head non-stop since yesterday, and it feels like I'll never be able to forget it. So, I work at this mid-sized office building downtown. It's nothing fancy, just one of those generic places where everyone has a cubicle and the coffee machine is always broken. I've been there for about 6 months and honestly, I didn't hate it. It was boring but predictable, and I was okay with that, except for this one guy. I don't know his name, no one does. Or if they do, they don't talk about it. He's one of those people you notice immediately because something about him just feels off. He doesn't work in my department, and I've never actually seen him sitting at a desk. He's just there, wandering the hallways, lurking near the break room, or standing way close to the elevator like he's waiting for someone. He never talks to anyone, or at least not that I've seen. But he stares a lot. Not at me specifically, at least I didn't think so at the time, but just at people. It's not a quick glance either. It's this long, unblinking stare that makes you feel like you've done something wrong just by existing. Yesterday started like any other day. I got up to work around 8:30, grabbed a coffee and settled into my cubicle. By mid-afternoon, I was ready to call it a day. I had a pile of reports to finish, but my brain was fired and I just needed a break. I decided to go down to the little cafe on the ground floor to grab a snack and clear my head. When I got to the elevator, there he was, standing just a few feet away, leaning against the wall like he'd been waiting for me. I almost turned around and took the stairs, but it was 10 floors down, and I wasn't in the right mood to hike. Plus, I told myself I was being ridiculous. He's just some awkward guy, right? No reason to freak out. So, I hit the button and waited. The elevator arrived with a ding and I stepped inside. Just as the doors were closing, I heard footsteps. "Hold it," someone called. I panicked for a second and hit the button to reopen the doors. Sure enough, it was him, the creepy guy. He stepped in without a word and the doors slid shut. The ride started normally. The elevator hummed softly as it began its descent and I kept my eyes fixed on the floor numbers lighting up above the door. I could feel him staring at me. I tried to act like I didn't notice, but my hands were shaking. I gripped the strap of my bag so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Then, out of nowhere, he reached over and hit the emergency stop button. The elevator jolted to a halt. The sudden movement made me stumble and I grabbed the railing to steady myself. "What?" I started to say, but he cut me off. "I bet you think I'm weird, huh?" he said, his voice low and shaking. "Everyone does. Nobody ever says it, but I know what they're thinking." I didn't know what to say. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. He kept talking, pacing back and forth in a small space like a caged animal. "They think I'm nothing," he said, his voice rising. "Just some freak who doesn't belong here. Do you know what that feels like? To be invisible? To have people avoid you like you're some kind of disease?" I wanted to scream, but my throat felt like it was closing up. I took a step back, pressing myself against the corner of the elevator. "I've tried to be nice," he continued. "I've tried to fit in, but it's never enough. People like you will never understand what it feels like to be me." He stopped pacing and turned to face me. His eyes were wild, and there was this twisted smile on his face that made my skin crawl. "For years I've thought about what I'd do," he said, taking a step closer to me. "How I'd make them see, make them pay." I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Look," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what you're going through, but this isn't the way to handle it. You don't have to do this. He laughed, this cold, hollow sound that made my stomach turn. You think you're better than me, don't you? He said. You think you can talk me down like I'm some kind of charity case? I shook my head, too terrified to speak. For what felt like an eternity, he just stood there staring at me. Then, without warning, he reached over and pressed the button to start the elevator again. The hum of the machinery felt deafening in the silence. The elevator began moving, and the floor numbers started lighting up again. When we reached the ground floor, he stepped out and turned back to face me. Maybe next time you'll understand, he said, his voice eerily calm. Then he smiled, not a normal smile, but this slow, deliberate grin that sent chills down my spine. You coming? He asked, motioning for me to follow him. I couldn't move. I just stood there, frozen in place as the elevator doors closed. When I finally made it back to my desk, I couldn't focus on anything. My hands were still shaking and I felt like I was going to throw up. I haven't told anyone about what happened. I don't even know how to explain it. Part of me thinks I should report him, but what would I even say? That some guy in the elevator freaked me out? All I know is I'm never taking that elevator ever again.